When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Broken Promises. User: 01PHDG29. Posted August 20th, 1995.
I'm about 6 months into a doctoral thesis on American folklore and dying oral traditions, and I'll be honest, most of it has been bullshit. Don't get me wrong, the people I've interviewed are kind, generous with their time, and they sure do love to talk. But after a dozen long drives and a pile of cassettes filled with stories about Civil War ghosts and devil dogs and one particularly aggressive skunk ape, I was starting to wonder if I'd picked the wrong topic. But then I met Ray. I was in Central Florida, a little ways off Lake Okeechobee, when a librarian in town told me to check on a guy who lived out near the water. She said he was old, didn't talk to many folks, but he used to be sharp as a tack and had a memory like a steel trap. Said he might have a few tales worth writing down. I drove out there with my recorder, expecting another tall tale and a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, but what I got instead is what I'm about to share with you now. Ray didn't say much at first, just sat on his porch with a cigarette, staring off toward the marsh like it owed him something. I told him who I was, what I was working on, and asked if he remembered any old legends or local stories passed down from his folks. He just nodded and said, "You recording?" I clicked the tape on. You won't find my house in a phone book. Landlines don't much work out here anyway, too much water in the ground. The old place has been in my family since the Hoover administration, but nobody ever stuck around long. They'd leave chasing women or work or something better. I didn't. Someone had to watch the marsh. Now, I ain't saying I was brave, far from it. Hell, I stayed because I was scared. Scared of what Daddy said might happen if we ever turned our back on this land for too long. It remembers, he told me, and it don't forgive easy. When I was little, maybe 7 or 8, Daddy used to sit out on the porch, rolling his own cigarettes, watching the mist roll off the marsh grass like the whole swamp was breathing. He'd spit chew into an old Maxwell House can and say things like, "You hear that? That's him, the man of the marsh. You listen close, he'll call your name in the fog." I figured it was just one of those things Daddy said, like how you tell kids these days your face will stick that way or chewing gum done stay in your belly for 7 years. Yeah, they're trying to keep me out of trouble, and I believed it until I turned 12, and then I didn't. That's how it goes. Now, look, I never saw the man. Not as a boy, not as a teenager sneaking beers behind the woodshed, not even after I buried both my parents in a dry patch near the tree line and signed the deed over in my name. But I heard things. Sometimes a splash with no ripples, sometimes a whisper when the windows were shut tight. Once I heard Mama's voice, even though she'd been gone 2 winters already. That was the first night I started locking my bedroom door. Still, you go on living. You patch the roof, you keep the generator running, you tell yourself it's just swamp air and loneliness playing tricks on an old man's brain. That worked just fine until last week. My daughter came down from Tallahassee for a few days, brought her boy with her too, my grandson Cody. He's 10 years old and stubborn as a rusted bolt. His mama told him not to go near the marsh, and so did I, but you know how these kids are, right? Curiosity's a kind of hunger in them, and they ain't learned yet that some things bite back and those damn things hurt. It was the second morning when I realized Cody wasn't in the house. I checked the porch, the shed, the path down to the dock, and that's when I saw the footprints in the mud, small ones and barefoot. Well, this old man ran. My knees ain't what they used to be neither, and every breath burned like boiling oil in my chest, but I ran. The marsh looked different that day too, quieter, like it was waiting. I shouted his name over and over. My voice echoed off cypress and cattails and got swallowed by the fog, and then I stopped. There was movement ahead, ripples parting like something was walking just beneath the surface. Then I heard it. Raymond. No one calls me that, not in 50 years. Raymond, it said again. The water parted, and he stepped out. Same as Daddy described, 7 feet tall, maybe more, skin like old bark soaked in oil, hair wet and stringy, hanging over a face that didn't seem to stay still. 1 second, it looked like my brother who drowned in '63. Next, it looked like the preacher from First Baptist. Then, like nothing at all. Just a blur of eyes and teeth and swamp. He looked at me like he knew me, like he'd been me. I ain't here to hurt you, I said, even though I didn't believe it. Smile. Your daddy made a deal. Those words stopped time. You lie, I said. Daddy didn't make no deals. Didn't he? The man asked. Traded years for peace. Promised his boy would stay. My blood ran colder than the muck around my boots. I remembered things then. Daddy praying in tongues some nights, burning things in the garden, digging holes I was never allowed to see. He broke that promise, the man said, and now you've broken yours. I shook my head. I didn't leave. No, but the boy will. And just like that, Cody stepped out of the reeds. No mud on him, no fear in his eyes, just calm, too calm. Grandpa, he says it's okay, he said. My heart cracked wide open. You hush now, I barked, trying to grab him. But my hand went right through his shoulder like smoke. He's not yours anymore, the man said. He's mine now. I dropped to my knees. What do you want? I asked. The man knelt too, face inches from mine. Your voice, he said. Tell the story right. Tell it true. Tell it so no one forgets me.
Subject: Porch light. User J3ND001. Posted November 11th, 1997.
I never liked the cold much, but I stayed because it was quiet. This far north, snow falls so thick you can hear your own pulse, while wind scrapes like it's looking for a way inside. Both isolating and peaceful at the same time. Well, that and we're really in nowhere town, not on real maps. We've got one gas station, one bar, and a dozen houses, mostly buried in drifts from October through May. Honestly, nobody comes here unless they're running from something. Myself, I rent a little A-frame out by the edge of the woods, maybe 40 yards from the only other house on this side of the county road. It belongs to a woman named Mrs. Geary. Must be pushing 80 now. Quiet, doesn't drive, doesn't leave, just tends to her generator and every night like clockwork turns on the porch light. That light, it's always been strange. Not just that it's yellow instead of white, or that it hums when the wind dies down, or even that it flickers in a steady rhythm some nights, like Morse code. What gets me is that it never goes off. Ever. Not even when the power went down for 4 days last winter and we were all pissing into buckets. Her place glowed like a candle in a cave, that yellow light on like absolutely nothing was wrong. It was like she was wired into something deeper than the grid. First time I asked her about it, she just stared through me like she was trying to remember if I'd always had a face. Then she said, flat as dead air, they told me to keep it on, always. When I asked who they were, she said, people who aren't people anymore. That was last year. I didn't ask again. Then last week, the light went out. It was around 2 a.m. I was up late on the couch, half asleep with the tape still buzzing in the VCR. The snow was coming down heavy, and I looked out the window, just a reflex, and there it was, dark. Her porch was pitch black. Now, you gotta understand, the porch light was a fixture, a landmark, really. You didn't realize how much you depended on it until it was gone. So I got this pit in my stomach, like gravity shifted just a little. I threw on boots, coat, the whole mess, and trudged over through snow up to my shins. Her front walk hadn't been shoveled in days. I knocked, but no answer. So I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then I heard it down below. A low, grinding sound, like something metal and old waking up beneath the ground. Not quite machinery, not quite animal either. I swear I felt it vibrate in my bones, and that's when I noticed the hatch. It was about 10 feet off the side of her house, half buried in snow, round and rusted, with a federal warning plaque barely visible under years of ice and grime. I'd never seen it before. Didn't even know it was there. The label said, U.S. Property, Station S-37, Biological Containment Access, Authorized Personnel Only. And below that, spray painted in flaking red, keep the light on. I backed away. That grinding noise, it was growing louder, a rhythmic even, like breath. Something big was down there, and it was stirring. Without hesitation, I ran back to my place and tried calling the sheriff. Of course, it rang 5 times and dropped to static. Nothing out here works when you need it, so I just sat by the window and stared into the dark, waiting, wondering. The next morning, I found Mrs. Geary out on her porch, fiddling with the bulb like nothing had happened. Her hands were blue from the cold, no gloves, no coat, just her house robe and slippers. "You okay?" I asked, trying not to sound like I was losing my mind. She didn't look at me, just nodded toward the hatch and said, "Almost too late." I asked her what it was, what was under there, or under the house. She muttered, "Something from before we were people. They keep it down there, say it's dormant, but it listens." Then she looked right at me and said, "One time when I was a girl, my uncle worked on one of the main stations up north. The same kind of light. His name was Collins. Died in the blizzard of 78. You know that story?" I didn't answer. She just nodded. I figured. Then she twisted the bulb in place and it flickered, buzzed, and held steady. "You ever turn it off again?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eye. "I never turn it off." I nodded and returned home, but that night, when I looked out the window at the light, I noticed it flickering, but not like normal. It was faster now, in some sort of pattern. I think it might be trying to say something.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.